The winter of 2011 should have killed Wren Calloway. 16 years old, $10 in her pocket. The temperature dropping fast toward single digits in the Blackwood Mountains of Idaho. Her uncle threw her out on her birthday. No coat that fit, no food, no plan. Just a heavy oak door slamming shut behind her, and the sound of gravel crunching under her boots as she walked away from the only home she had ever known. She didn't go to the police. She didn't hitchhike to town. She did the one thing nobody expected a 16-year-old girl to do in the middle of a blizzard. She found a hillside, and she started digging. By the end of the second day, she had a roof over her head. Dirt walls, pine branches overhead. 38 degrees inside when it was 14 outside. Not comfortable, not safe, but alive. She thought the hardest part was behind her. She was wrong, because on the 8th night, something happened that had nothing to do with the cold and everything to do with what was buried beneath her. Her firewood was warm, not room temperature, not slightly less frozen than expected. Warm, the way wood feels after an afternoon in the summer sun. And the dirt at the back wall of her shelter, the wall she had carved directly into the hillside, was dry, powder dry, and it was breathing heat. Wren Calloway pressed her palm flat against that wall and held it there, because whatever was on the other side of that earth, it was steady and alive and about to change everything. The winter of 2011 did not arrive gently in the Blackwood Mountains of Idaho. It came the way it always did up there, hard, fast, without warning or apology. By the second week of November, the temperature had already dropped to 14 degrees at night, the kind of cold that did not simply chill you. It pressed against you, sat on your chest, reminded you very quietly that it was older and stronger and more patient than anything you could put on your body or build with your hands. Wren Calloway knew this cold. She had grown up in it. What she did not know on the night of November 14th was that she was about to face it completely alone. She was 16 years old, 5'4", 118 pounds in her heaviest winter layers. Her hair was the same dark auburn as her father's, her eyes the same particular shade of gray that looked green in summer light and almost silver in snow. She was not the kind of girl who cried easily. Her father had raised her on a mountain, and the mountain had finished the job. His name was Thomas Calloway, and 8 months before that November night, a pine tree had fallen on him in the eastern woods of their property while he was logging alone. That was what the accident report said. That was what Deputy Dex Pruitt had written down in his careful, unhurried handwriting the afternoon they found Thomas's body at the base of the ravine. Wren had read that report 4 times. She had held it up to the window light in the cabin kitchen, looking for something she could not name. Something that felt wrong. Something that sat in her stomach the way a swallowed stone sits. Heavy, immovable, not going anywhere. She never found it, not in the report. She would find it 8 days later, in the dark, underground. But that came after. Everything came after Roland Voss. He arrived the week after the funeral with 2 duffel bags, a locked metal cash box, and the quiet, settled certainty of a man who believed he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He was Thomas's older brother by 11 years. He had their father's wide jaw and their mother's pale eyes. He had nothing else of either of them. He moved into the main bedroom without asking. He sat in Thomas's chair by the fireplace without pausing. He ate the food in Thomas's kitchen with the appetite of someone who had been waiting a long time for this particular meal. Wren watched all of it and said nothing, because what was there to say? The county had named him her legal guardian within 3 weeks of the funeral. The paperwork moved fast. Everything moved fast in a way that later she would understand was not accidental. For 8 months, she existed under the same roof as Roland Voss. She went to school in Oak Haven. She did her chores. She kept her father's tools in exactly the order Thomas had left them hanging on the pegboard in the workshop. She cooked. She cleaned. She stayed out of Roland's way. And she watched. Roland drank in the evenings. Not stumbling drunk. The controlled, regular kind of drinking that meant it was not a vice so much as a maintenance routine. He made phone calls behind closed doors and always lowered his voice when Wren passed the hallway. He drove down to town at odd hours, 2 in the morning sometimes, 3. He had a temper the way certain mountains have fault lines, invisible until they weren't. Wren learned to read the signs, the set of his jaw when a phone call did not go the way he wanted, the way he poured his second glass of bourbon before he had finished the first, the way his eyes tracked her when she entered a room, not with warmth, not even with ordinary indifference, but with something that looked almost like calculation. She kept her head down. She kept her mouth shut. She waited without knowing quite what she was waiting for. It came on November 14th, her birthday. She was 16. There was no cake. There was no card. There had not been any acknowledgement at all, and she had not expected one. She made herself a cup of coffee at the kitchen table and sat in the gray morning light, looking out at the Blackwood Ridge, and she thought about her father. The way he always made pancakes on her birthday. The way he put exactly 1 candle in the middle of the stack, no matter how old she was turning, and lit it with the long matches from the fireplace box. 1 candle, he always said, because every year you make it is worth celebrating. She was thinking about that candle when she saw it. Roland had left a document on the kitchen table the night before, a contract of some kind. She had not touched it, but from where she sat with her coffee she could see the header, bold black letters, Vantage Ridge, LLC, and below the header, a signature line, blank. She would not have thought anything of it, except that she had seen that name before. Vantage Ridge LLC. Somewhere. Recent. She turned it over in her mind, trying to catch the memory, and she almost had it when the hallway door swung open and Roland walked in, still wearing yesterday's shirt. He saw her looking at the document. The air in the kitchen changed. She should have looked away, should have looked back out at the ridge, should have done almost anything other than what she did, which was look up at him steadily and say quietly, "What is Vantage Ridge?" Roland crossed the room in 4 steps. He was not stumbling. He was not wild-eyed. He was precise in the way that made him more frightening, not less. He picked up the document from the table, folded it once, and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. Then he looked at her with those pale eyes that had never held a single warm thing. "That's not your business. My father's name is on that. Your father is dead." The words landed like a slap, flat, final, designed to hurt. Wren set down her coffee cup. Her hands were steady. She was proud of that later. Her hands were completely steady. "I want to know about the insurance policy," she said. "The one from Dad's employer. It was supposed to come to the estate." Roland was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You think you're owed something?" "I think he left something for me. He left this family drowning in debt." Roland's voice did not rise. That was the thing. It stayed completely, utterly level. This house, this land, every acre of it has liens on it you don't know about. I have been managing this situation since March. I have been protecting you from the reality of what your father left behind. I don't believe you. That's not my problem." He crossed to the front door and opened it. The November cold poured in immediately, a wall of it sharp and absolute. "You're 16, he said. "Legally old enough to work. Legally old enough to make your own arrangements." Wren stood up slowly. "It's 20 degrees outside." "I'm aware. Where am I supposed to go?" He looked at her without expression. "That's not my problem either." She had 60 seconds, maybe less. She moved through this cabin with the focused calm of someone who had been in some deep and cellular way preparing for this moment without knowing it. Canvas school backpack. Her father's heavy insulated jacket from the hook by the door. It fell to her knees 3 sizes too large, and she put it on anyway. Wool blanket, flashlight, waterproof matches, 2 pairs of thick socks, a hunting knife in the side pocket that Thomas had given her for her 13th birthday and made her learn to use properly before she was allowed to carry it. She reached for the photograph on the bookshelf, the one of her and her father standing on the eastern ridge the summer she was 12, both of them squinting in the sun, both of them grinning. She had her hand in his, and he had his head tilted down toward her, like she was the most important thing on that whole mountain, which she knew now she had been. Roland slammed the front door open against the wall. She left the photograph. She walked out. The door closed behind her with the sound she felt in her back teeth. She stood in the driveway for a moment, gravel under her boots. Darkness in every direction. The Blackwood Ridge rising above the tree line to the east, its silhouette black against a sky that was starting slowly to release snow. She reached into the pocket of her jeans. One crumpled $10 bill, the last allowance her father had given her the week before he died. She had not spent it. It had stayed in that pocket through washing through months of daily life, through everything. Like she had been keeping it for something. She looked at it in the dark. Then she turned and walked toward the lights of Oak Haven. She had a plan. It was not a good plan, but it was a plan. The town was 7 miles down the mountain. She knew it the way she knew everything up here by heart, by foot, by years of walking every trail and logging road on the Callaway property. She knew where the ground was soft and where it was solid. She knew which creek crossings froze first. She knew how the wind moved through the gap in the ridge. Thomas had taught her all of that. He had taught her the mountain the way some fathers teach their children to read, starting with the big shapes and working down to the details, starting with respect and working toward love. She did not go to the police. She knew better. Dex Pruitt had written that accident report, and Dex Pruitt had been to the cabin 4 times since the funeral. Always when Roland was home, always going into the study with the door closed, always leaving with the look of a man who had been reassured about something he was not sure about to begin with. She did not go to social services, because social services would put her in a facility in the county over while they sorted out the paperwork. And while she was in a facility, the land would sit unattended. And Roland would do whatever he was planning to do with Vantage Ridge, LL. And by the time she was 18, there would be nothing left of Thomas Callaway's life's work. She was not leaving this mountain. She needed shelter. She needed it fast. Greer's Supply and Hardware sat at the edge of Oak Haven, a flat-fronted building with a hand-painted sign and a light that burned until 8 most evenings. Emmett Greer was 71 years old, built like a man who had done physical labor every day of his adult life and intended to keep doing it with a white beard and the unhurried movements of someone who had stopped being in a hurry sometime in the mid-90s. He was counting the register when Wren came in through the back. "We're closing up," he said without looking up. Wren moved to the clearance bins at the back of the store. She bypassed the camping gear. Too expensive. She found a military-style entrenching tool, the folding kind, with a blade that locked into position and a pickaxe edge on the back side. Price tag said $5.50. Slightly rusted on the handle. She didn't care about the rust. She found a heavy-duty plastic tarp in olive drab. A tear near one of the grommets. marked down to $3. She brought both to the counter and laid her $10 bill on the glass. Emmett looked up. He looked at her face, at the oversized jacket, at the backpack, at the cold and the calm, and something held very tightly behind her eyes. He rang it up without speaking. "Total comes to $901, he said, "with tax." He looked at the register, then back at her. Then he reached under the counter and slid a block of fire starter bricks across the glass. Wax wrapped, heavy. "Inventory error," he said. His voice was gruff, but his eyes were not. Wren picked up the fire starters. She was about to put them in her bag when Emmett spoke again. Quieter. Not the hardware store voice. The other one. "Your daddy was the best man on this mountain," he said. "Don't you forget that." She looked at him. "I won't," she said. He nodded once. She turned to leave. Then he said in a voice so low she almost missed it under the sound of the register closing, "If you ever need help, you come back here first." She paused with her hand on the door. She didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. She filed it away and walked back into the dark. The eastern ridge of the Callaway property dropped into a ravine the locals called Creston Draw. Dense, steep, heavily wooded. Not officially on any tourist map. Nobody went down there in November by choice. Thomas had taken Wren into Creston Draw every spring to map the creek levels and check the old cedar groves. She knew every foot of it. She went there now. She had roughly 4 hours of functionality left in her hands before the cold would start making decisions for her. She knew this the way her father had taught her to know it, not as panic, but as information. The body had a schedule in the cold. Respect the schedule. She found her spot at the base of a hillside where the ground sloped sharply upward, creating a natural wall of earth she could dig into. The slope faced east, which meant it would catch the early morning sun and hold residual warmth in the soil longer than a north or west-facing cut would. Her father had pressed his palm flat against a hillside like this one years ago and told her the earth faces east. Same as we do, always moving toward the light. She set her flashlight on a root so the beam pointed at the slope. She unfolded the entrenching tool, locked the blade, and struck. The top layer was frozen solid, like hitting pavement. The shock ran up her arms and into her shoulders, and she gritted her teeth and struck again and again. She used the pickaxe edge to break through the frost crust, then switched to the blade to move the loosened earth. Break, dig, break, dig. By noon, her hands were bleeding through her gloves. By mid-afternoon, her lower back had stopped being a separate pain and had merged with everything else into one general enormous ache. She did not stop. She thought about Thomas sitting in his chair by the fireplace while she dug. She thought about Roland pouring his bourbon and making his phone calls and sleeping in her father's bed. She thought about the document on the kitchen table with its bold header and its blank signature line, and she drove the blade into the frozen earth again and again and again. Anger is not always destruction. Sometimes it is the most precise tool you have. By the end of the second day, she had carved a trench into the hillside, 4 feet deep, 6 feet long, 3 feet wide. The back wall was vertical cut straight into the earth of the slope. The side walls were solid packed Idaho clay. She constructed the roof from thick fallen pine branches, laying them across the top of the trench in a tight overlapping pattern. She draped the torn tarp over the branches, weighted it with heavy rocks along the edges, then piled excavated dirt and dead pine needles over the tarp until the whole structure blended into the hillside. She left an opening at the front just large enough to crawl through, covered it with pine boughs and her backpack. She lit one fire starter brick inside the trench, burned it long enough to drive out the damp, then let it go out. She would not risk smoke in the daytime. Then she crawled in. The silence was immediate. The wind, which had been tearing at her face and hands for 2 full days, simply ceased. The biting air softened to something merely cold. The temperature inside the dugout was not warm. Nothing about it was warm. But it was holding. The mass of earth around her, the insulating layer above the natural ground temperature below the frost line. It was all doing what Thomas had said it would do. The earth is a blanket, he had told her once when they were planting the kitchen garden, and she had asked why the seeds needed to be buried so deep. Get below the frost line, and the dirt stays in the 50s, something even in December. That's nature's insulation. Has been since before any of us got here. She was below the frost line now. She pulled the wool blanket around her, put her back against the earthen wall, and for the first time in 48 hours, she stopped moving. The blizzard hit 3 days later. It came in the night the way the serious ones always did in the Blackwoods, without fanfare. Without the slow build of clouds that gave you time to prepare. 1 hour there was a clear sky with the stars punishingly bright. The next there was nothing but white noise and fury. For 3 days Wren stayed underground. She melted snow in her canteen over the fire starter bricks, eating the protein bars she had bought from the vending machine at the Oak Haven gas station with her change from the hardware store. She did isometric exercises in the dark, pressing her palms against the earthen walls and pushing, tensing, and releasing every muscle group in sequence the way her father had taught her for winter camping. Keep the blood moving, he had said. The body is smarter than the cold. Give it a chance. She slept in 2-hour increments. Woke, checked her hands, checked her feet, did the exercises, slept again. On the 3rd day, the wind dropped. The silence was so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. She lay still for a while, listening to it. Then she sat up and began pulling wood from the stack she had built against the back wall of the dugout deadfall and pine logs and stripped birch branches she had dragged back before the storm. She reached for a log near the bottom of the pile and stopped. It was warm. Not warm the way a thing gets after you've been holding it in your hands. Warm the way an object gets when it has been sitting near a consistent heat source for an extended period of time. She pressed her palm against it, then against the log beside it, then against the split pine chunk at the very base of the stack. All of them warm. She sat very still in the dark. Then she clicked on her flashlight. She swept the beam slowly across the back wall of her dugout, the wall she had carved directly into the hillside, the back end of the trench where the earth ran deepest into the slope. The soil on the side walls was the dark, slightly glistening clay she had been looking at for 2 weeks. Cold, damp, normal. The soil at the back wall was different, dry. Not just less wet, dry. Powder dry the way soil got in midsummer drought. And it was warm. Steady and unmistakably warm the way a living thing holds heat. Wren got on her knees. She pressed both palms flat against the back wall. Something on the other side of that earth was breathing. She picked up the entrenching tool, locked the blade, and began to scrape. The dry, powdery soil came away easily, too easily for packed hillside clay. After 3 inches of dirt, the flashlight caught something, a dull, metallic surface. She swept more dirt away with her gloved hands. More metal, riveted, industrial grade. She cleared a larger patch with the shovel, and then she stopped, because she could see what it was. A door. Not a hatch that a person might accidentally bury, not an old septic cover or an abandoned drainage pipe. A door. A heavy, circular, iron-wheeled door of the kind she had seen in photographs of old mine shafts, the kind built to withstand pressure differentials, and cave-ins, the kind designed to seal something off permanently. The wheel handle was cold to the touch, but the door itself was warm. Wren sat back on her heels. Her breath came fast in the small space pluming in the beam of her flashlight. She put her hand back on the door and held it there. Steady warmth. Even. Constant. Not a fire. Not a chemical reaction. Something mechanical. Something that had been running for a long time. She gripped the iron wheel with both hands. She braced her boots against the base of the door frame, and she pulled. Nothing. She adjusted her grip, set her jaw, pulled again, using her legs, driving the momentum up through her core and into her shoulders. A sound, low and grinding, deep in the metal. She pulled harder, and then with a shriek of rust and old metal that seemed far too loud for a hole in a hillside in the middle of a November night in Idaho, the wheel turned. Once, twice, 3 times. The locking mechanism released with a sound like a gunshot. She grabbed the door handle and pulled. The seal broke with a rush of pressurized air that hit her face like a warm wave. Not fire warm, not oven warm. The kind of warmth that said people have been here. Something has been running here for a long time. The air carried a smell she could not immediately place. ozone, hot dust, something electrical, something that reminded her of the back of an overheating computer multiplied by 1,000. She clicked her flashlight on. Beyond the door was a corridor, narrow, 3 feet wide, corrugated steel walls bolted together in overlapping sections, a smooth concrete floor sloping gently downward. The temperature was at least 85 degrees and climbing as she stood in the opening. She stood there for a long moment. The warm air moved past her into the cold dugout behind her, and the cold air moved forward into the corridor. And she stood at the boundary between the two and understood with the particular clarity that comes only at moments that divide your life into before and after that, whatever was down that corridor had already changed everything. She just did not know how much yet. She left her father's canvas jacket on the floor of the dugout, and she went in. The corridor ran for 40 feet before it opened. She heard the sound first, a low mechanical roar she had been half hearing for days. She had assumed it was wind. She had assumed it was some trick of the ravine acoustics. The corridor opened onto a metal catwalk that overlooked a cavern. Wren stopped at the railing and looked down. The space below her was the size of a large warehouse. The stone walls were jagged, dark gray natural rock. This had been a mine once, the old copper mines Thomas had told her about, the ones the state had sealed in the 1980s because the veins had run dry and the shafts had become unstable. Someone had moved in. The cavern floor was packed with metal racks. Tall racks bolted to the floor and guy-wired to the ceiling, running in long parallel rows. On the racks were machines, hundreds of them, black and gray rectangular units stacked 6 and 7 high, placed side by side with the precise utilitarian density of a system built for efficiency, not aesthetics. Every single one of them was running. Their cooling fans spun at speed, generating the roar she had mistaken for wind. Their exhaust was the heat she had been sleeping against for 2 weeks, bleeding through 40 feet of Idaho hillside and into her dugout, and warming her firewood and saving, without knowing it, her life. On the face of each unit, rows of tiny LED lights blinked in the dark. Green, red, green. 1,000 tiny heartbeats in the stone. Wren knew what she was looking at. Thomas had explained it to her the previous winter, walking her through a news article on his laptop. How cryptocurrency mining worked. How the process required massive computing power. How the biggest cost was electricity, enormous, continuous, industrial-scale electricity. How some operations, the illegal ones, dealt with that cost by tapping into public utility lines without authorization. Someone had built a crypto mine inside the mountain. On her father's land, she descended the metal stairs to the cavern floor. The heat was oppressive. She was sweating through her flannel shirt before she reached the bottom. She followed the largest bundle of power cables toward the back of the cavern. They ran along the wall as thick as her forearm, terminating at a massive electrical junction box bolted to the rock face. The cables running into it from outside disappeared into a conduit that ran through the rock in the direction of the county's main power line 2 miles east of the property. They were stealing electricity, industrial amounts of it, hundreds of thousands of dollars of it. Near the junction box was a makeshift office, a cheap folding table, a rolling chair, a metal lockbox padlocked, an empty coffee mug. Wren approached the table. Printed spreadsheets, shipping invoices for ventilation equipment, a glass ashtray full of cigar stubs. Roland's brand. She recognized them from the ashtray on the porch of the cabin, which was always full, and which she had emptied every week for 8 months, without ever asking why a man sat out there every night smoking so many cigars alone in the dark. She understood now. He had not been sitting on the porch. He had been standing at the edge of the ravine looking down at what he owned. She almost did not look under the ashtray. There was nothing about a glass ashtray that suggested there was anything beneath it, except that something made her reach out and lift it, and underneath it was a notebook. Brown leather cover worn thin at the corners, a red elastic band around it, a small water stain near the top right corner in the shape of a crescent moon. She had given her father that notebook for Christmas 3 years ago. She had bought it at the stationery store in Boise with her own saved money and presented it to him wrapped in brown paper at the kitchen table. He had opened it and held it for a moment, just looked at it, and then looked at her and said, "This is exactly right, Wren. Exactly right." Her hands were not steady when she reached for it. She peeled back the elastic band. She opened to the first page. Thomas's handwriting. Dense and careful and small, the way it always was when he was recording something he needed to remember precisely. She turned pages, land management notes, precipitation measurements, equipment maintenance logs, all the ordinary record-keeping of a man running a property largely alone. She kept turning, and then the handwriting changed. Near the back of the notebook, the careful density gave way to something faster, tighter. The pen pressed harder against the page. February 3rd. Found a secondary line running along the eastern ridge beneath the old logging road. Not on any utility map I have. Traced it toward Creston Draw. February 9th. The line runs into the old copper mine shaft at the base of the draw. Shaft is supposed to be sealed. It is not sealed. There is a ventilation system running. I can hear it from the ravine. February 14th. I went in. I found a server operation, large scale. The power draw is enormous. Someone is tapping the county grid from inside the mountain. March 2nd. Roland's truck was parked on the access road 2 nights in a row. I checked the LLC registration on the equipment invoices. Vantage Ridge, LLC. Filed in Nevada. The registered agent address is a mail forwarding service. March 8th. I confronted Roland. He was not surprised. He was not afraid. He told me his partner in the county keeps the power anomaly buried. He told me that if I go to the state authorities, the operation will be backdated to look like I authorized it. He told me I have no proof. March 15th. I am going to the FBI field office in Boise. I have been documenting for 6 weeks. I have the invoices. I have the utility anomaly numbers. I have photographs of the shaft entrance. It is enough. Wren turned to the next page. It was the last entry. March 16th. If anything happens before I can make this trip, Emmett has something for Wren. He knows what to do. She is stronger than she thinks she is. She always has been. Keep Wren off the ridge. March 17th was the date on the accident report. The date Deputy Dex Pruitt had driven up the mountain and taken notes in his careful, unhurried handwriting and written accident at the top of the page, and closed his notebook and driven back to town. Wren stood at the folding table in the heat of the cavern with her father's notebook open in her hands. The server farm roared around her. The LEDs blinked their 1,000 small rhythms in the dark. The stolen electricity hummed through the cables above her head. Her father had been planning to go to the FBI the day before he died, and Emmett Greer had something for her. She pressed the notebook against her chest, closed her eyes for just a moment, then she opened them, and she began planning her way out. She did not run. That was the first thing, the most important thing. Every instinct in her body was screaming at her to move, to grab the notebook and sprint for the catwalk and get back through that iron door and seal it behind her and run until her lungs gave out. But Wren Calloway had grown up on a mountain, and the mountain had taught her that the animals that survived were not the fastest ones. They were the ones that knew when to be still. So she stood at the folding table and she breathed. In, out, slow, even. She pressed her father's notebook flat against her stomach under the hem of her flannel shirt, tucked into the waistband of her jeans. She smoothed her shirt over it. Then she looked at the cavern. She needed to know the layout, not because she wanted to, because she had to, because Thomas Calloway's daughter did not leave a place she might need to navigate in the dark without first understanding where everything was. One row of racks to the left of the main aisle, one row to the right, a secondary aisle running perpendicular at the far end. The stairs she had come down were at the north end of the cavern beneath the catwalk. The primary entrance was at the south end, a wide reinforced tunnel, tall enough for a vehicle. The smell of diesel faint but present. A vehicle entrance, which meant there was a road, which meant there was another way in. And if there was another way in, there was another way out. She was still standing at the folding table cataloging all of this when she heard it. A sound from the south end of the cavern. Not the servers, not the ventilation. Something different. A low rhythmic grinding rising in pitch, the unmistakable mechanical groan of a heavy door being raised by a motorized track. A garage door, opening. Light spilled into the south tunnel, pale and gray. outdoor light, and behind it the deep, chest-level rumble of a diesel engine. Wren moved before the thought was fully formed. She dropped to the floor behind the nearest rack, pressed herself against the base of the server units, and made herself flat. She was on her stomach, with her cheek against the cold concrete before the truck had fully entered the tunnel. She could see the tires from where she lay. Heavy-duty all-terrain, caked with mud and packed snow. The engine cut. 2 doors opened. 2 sets of boots hit the ground. Heavy boots. Steel toes. They came down the main aisle. Wren watched the boots pass her position. 4 feet away. 3. She stopped breathing. They moved to the back of the cavern, toward the office area, toward the folding table where 60 seconds ago she had been standing. 1 pair of boots stopped. The other kept moving toward the junction box. Then a voice. "The ambient temp is climbing." High-pitched, nervous. The voice of a man who was always waiting for something to go wrong. "I've been watching the thermometer readings on the East Rack cluster for 3 days. If we don't improve the exhaust draw on the north side, we're going to start losing units." The second voice came from near the junction box. Low, unhurried. The cadence of a man who had never in his life been required to feel nervous about anything. Roland Voss. Wren pressed her face harder against the concrete. Her heart was hitting the inside of her ribs so hard she was genuinely afraid they could hear it over the server noise. "The ventilation is fine," Roland said. "The ventilation is not Dex. The ventilation is fine." So that was Dex Pruitt over by the racks. The man who had written the accident report. The man who had come to the cabin 4 times in 8 months and gone into the study with Roland and come out looking reassured. Not reassured, paid. "The power company sent another automated alert," Pruitt said. His boots shifted. The nervous energy was in them even when he was standing still. "3rd one this month. If they send a physical inspector instead of a drone, if someone actually drives up the mountain and checks the secondary line." "They won't. You don't know that." "I know the district supervisor." Roland's voice had an edge now. Not anger. Something colder. Certainty. "I have known him for 12 years. He golfs with my accountant. The alerts get reviewed, the file gets closed, and we keep running. That's how it has worked for 3 years, and that is how it will continue to work." Pruitt was quiet for a moment. "And the girl," he said. 2 words. Wren went completely still. "People are talking," Pruitt said. Emmett Greer told half of Oakhaven she came into the store the night she disappeared. Bought a shovel and a tarp. Folks are doing the math. Let them do math. Roland, she's a runaway. The boots moved away from the junction box, moving down the center aisle, moving toward the folding table. A 16-year-old runaway in the Blackwood Mountains in November. That is a tragedy. The kind of tragedy that happens here every few years. A cold snap, a wrong turn, an inexperienced kid who didn't know what she was getting into. Wren was under the table before she knew she was moving. She did not remember deciding to do it. One moment, she was flat against the base of the rack. The next, she was curled beneath the folding table with the canvas tarp pulled down over the front edge, and she could see Roland's steel-toed boots stop directly in front of her hiding place. 8 inches away. She held the notebook flat against her stomach with both hands. She put her tongue between her teeth. She did not breathe.
By the time spring thaw hits, Roland said, there won't be anything left to find. And once she's declared legally deceased, the remainder of the insurance policy defaults to the surviving guardian. A pause. The sound of papers being moved on the table surface directly above her head. Clean. David, Pruitt said quietly. You keep calling him David. That was his name. His name was Thomas. Silence.
Thomas, Roland said, flat, like a correction he didn't particularly care about making.
Right.
He did not know his own brother's name. He did not know his own brother's name. Wren bit down on her tongue and tasted copper and did not make a sound.
I didn't sign up for this,
Pruitt said. His voice had dropped lower. The nervous energy had shifted into something that might, in another man, have been the beginning of a conscience.
Thomas, that was you saying we had no choice. The feds were already sniffing around. He was going to burn the whole thing. I understood that. But the kid, Roland said, is a loose end. She's 16, and she is somewhere on that ridge right now with her father's notebook.
The boots shifted, turned, began moving toward the rack on the right side of the aisle. Which means she has either read it or she hasn't. Either way, she is not in a position to do anything about it. She has $10 and a tarp in a blizzard. The mountain is handling it. Wren heard Pruitt walk away toward the far rack cluster. The clatter of tools. He was doing what he had been told to do, swapping out hardware, keeping his head down, not looking too hard at the thing he had agreed to be part of. Roland was at the junction box now. She could hear him working the panel. Could see his boots from under the tarp, the scuffed steel toes pointing toward the electrical cabinet. He stopped. She heard him inhale. You smell that? Her entire body crystallized.
Smell what? Pruitt called from down the aisle. Like someone's been in here. Recent.
A pause.
Like sweat. It's always hot in here. We all sweat.
Roland did not answer immediately. His boots did not move. 1 second, 2, 5. She counted them, because counting was something to do that was not screaming.
Check the north hatch, Roland said finally.
What? The emergency hatch, on the north wall. Go check it. The sound of Pruitt's tools being set down, his boots moving, up the stairs, along the catwalk, toward the north wall, toward the iron door, toward her dugout. Roland returned to the junction box, numbers being read aloud under his breath. Voltage, draw. The language of a man checking his investment. She needed to move right now before Pruitt found the iron door and came back and reported that yes, it had been opened from the outside. Yes, someone had been here. But Roland was 3 feet away. 3 feet. She counted his breaths, counted the seconds between the panel readings. Pruitt called from somewhere above. "Hatch looks sealed." He had not tested it, had only looked, which meant there was still time. Roland grunted, closed the panel. His boots moved away from the table toward the center aisle, toward the south end of the cavern.
"I'm going back up to the cabin," he said. "Insurance adjuster is coming at 2. Make sure the exhaust fans on rack 7 are running at full capacity by morning." "Yeah." "Dex." "Yeah." "We are 3 weeks from the big rally. We are looking at 40, maybe 50,000 in the next month alone. Everything we have built here, everything is contingent on not panicking. Do you understand me?" A long pause. "Yeah," Pruitt said. "I understand."
The truck engine started. The garage door ground its way upward. Light flooded the south tunnel again, and then the truck rolled out, and the door ground back down, and the light disappeared. Wren was alone in the cavern with Pruitt and the roaring servers and the blinking LEDs and her father's notebook pressed flat against her stomach. She had maybe 15 minutes. She waited. She listened to Pruitt move through the racks, swapping hardware, his movements settling into the methodical rhythm of a man doing a job he has done many times. She listened until she could track him by sound alone. Far end of rack 4. The rattle of a motherboard being pulled. A soft curse. The clatter of a replacement unit being seated. His back was to the stairs. She moved. Out from under the table. Low. Fast. Using the racks as cover, staying in the shadow between the units and the cavern wall. The stairs were 20 feet away. 15. 10. Her boot caught the edge of a loose cable on the floor. She stumbled, caught herself on the rack with both hands. The server units rattled. Not much. But in a cavern full of mechanical precision, in a space where every sound had an assigned source and an assigned rhythm, the rattle was wrong. Wrong enough. She heard Pruitt stop moving. She was already running, up the stairs 2 at a time, onto the catwalk. The metal grating rang under her feet, and she stopped caring about quiet because quiet was no longer the point. The point was the iron door at the north end of the catwalk, and the corridor beyond it, and the 40 feet of warm tunnel that led back to her dugout and the Idaho night.
"Hey,"
Pruitt's voice from below. Not a shout. Surprised, still processing, she hit the iron door at a run, grabbed the wheel with both hands and turned, and it moved immediately because she had already broken the rust 2 hours ago, and the locking mechanism released on the second rotation, and she yanked the door open and threw herself into the corridor. She heard him on the stairs. Boot on metal. Fast. She ran. The corridor was 40 feet, and she covered it in seconds, and she came out through the iron hatch into the dugout, and she spun and grabbed the wheel from inside and pulled the door shut. The seal caught. She spun the wheel. 1 rotation, 2. The lock engaged. She pressed her back against the iron door and listened, his boots on the catwalk, slowing, stopping. The door shuddered once lightly as he tried the handle from the other side. Locked. From the inside, which from his perspective meant it had been locked from the beginning. Silence. Then his voice muffled through the iron and 40 feet of steel corridor. Roland, we've got a problem. Static. Radio. She did not wait for the response. She grabbed her father's canvas jacket from the floor of the dugout. She shoved the notebook deeper into her waistband. She pulled on the jacket, worked the zipper with fingers that were shaking now. Not from cold at all, and she went out through the crawl entrance into the Idaho night. The cold hit her like a wall. She did not care. She stood upright in the dark and understood with complete clarity what the next hours required. She could not go to Oak Haven. Pruitt would have every road covered within the hour. She could not go to the cabin. Roland was there. She needed to get to a state police jurisdiction, completely outside the county, outside anything Pruitt could reach with a radio call. 15 miles south, down through the Blackwood foothills, and along the old state route that ran parallel to the county road, was the I-90 Commercial Way Station. Idaho State Police. A completely separate jurisdiction from the county sheriff. A place Roland Voss had no relationships and no leverage. 15 miles. In November. At night. She looked up at the sky. No stars. Cloud cover complete. Temperature dropping again already into the low teens. The kind of cold that made the air feel thin. But she had walked this mountain her entire life, and she had her father's jacket and her father's notebook and his voice in the back of her head, steady and quiet. The body is smarter than the cold. Give it a chance. She started walking. She took the creek path, the old drainage creek that cut diagonally down through the Blackwood foothills and came out 3 miles east of the state road. Thomas had walked this path with her when she was 9 years old, pointing out the landmarks. The split boulder at the first bend, the grove of old-growth tamarack where the creek turned south. The long flat section where the water ran shallow over flagstone. She knew every foot of it, even in the dark, even in November, even with the creek frozen solid and the footing uncertain and the cold pressing against her face with the steady, impersonal force of something that did not particularly want her dead, but would not go out of its way to keep her alive. The first hour passed the way hard physical effort always passes. Not quickly, not slowly. One step at a time. She was still moving when it was over. The second hour was harder. Her feet were losing detail. Not gone, not dangerous yet. But the cold was working its way through her boot soles, and the pain was becoming the kind of background noise that required active management.
She counted her steps in sets of 100. Reset. Counted again. It gave the mind something to do that was not calculating how far she had left to go. She was 3 miles into the creek path when she saw the light.
Not the sweep of headlights, not a moving flashlight beam, a stationary light, low and small. The steady amber glow of a parking light on a vehicle that had been sitting in one place for a while, parked at the edge of the old logging access road along the top of the creek embankment, where the creek path came closest to the road. She stopped. Every muscle in her body went tight. A truck. An old GMC dark blue or possibly green, hard to tell in the dark. She could see it now as she got closer, still staying in the shadow of the creek bank. She knew that truck. She had seen it parked outside Greer's Supply every day for years. At the Oak Haven Diner on Saturday mornings, at the feed store and the gas station and the post office. Always the same truck. Always the same driver. It was Emmett Greer's truck. He was sitting in the driver's seat with the engine off and a thermos on the dashboard. And as she came up the embankment toward the road, he turned and looked at her through the window, like he had been expecting her from a particular direction at a particular time. She came around to the passenger side. He leaned over and pushed the door open from the inside. She got in. The cab held the warmth of a man who had been sitting in it for a while. The smell of it was coffee and wood smoke and something faintly mineral like creek water and clay. Emmett looked at her. The frozen hair and the cracked lips and the way she was holding herself carefully, the way a person holds themselves when they know they are close to a line they cannot afford to cross.
"I figured you'd come this way,"
he said. "How did you know I'd find the door?"
"I didn't." He unscrewed the thermos cap and handed it to her. Coffee still hot. "I've been coming here every night for 3 days, since the night you came into the store." She wrapped both hands around the thermos cap and drank. The heat went down her throat and into her chest, and the relief of it was so complete she had to close her eyes for a moment. "You knew about the mine," she said, not a question. "Yes." "How long?" He was quiet, looking out the windshield at the dark tree line. "I've known Roland was using Creston Draw for 3 years, since he came to me with the deal." He paused. "I didn't know the full scale of it until your father told me in February. He's the one who went in and saw it for himself. I only knew I had signed something I should never have signed." She waited. "My wife was sick," he said. "Margaret. She needed a surgery the insurance wouldn't cover. We didn't have that kind of money." He turned the thermos in his hands. "Roland came to me in the spring, offered to pay the full cost of the surgery in exchange for signing over my minority stake in the Creston Draw mineral rights. Rights my family had held since my grandfather's time. Rights that on paper didn't amount to much because the copper had been played out for decades. Except the copper wasn't what he wanted. No, he needed a legitimate local name on the LLC filing. Someone in the county whose signature wouldn't raise flags. Another pause. Margaret had her surgery.
She recovered, and I went home and I lived with what I had done. Wren looked at the windshield, the trees, the dark. Thomas found out.
Thomas found out,
Emmett said. He came to me in February. He sat in this truck right where you're sitting, and he told me what he had found in the mine and what he intended to do about it. And he told me he was worried about you. He gave you something. Emmett reached into the inside pocket of his coat. He pulled out an envelope, standard letter size, sealed. Wren's name on the front in her father's handwriting. She looked at it for a moment without touching it. He told me to give it to you if something happened to him, Emmett said. He said to keep it somewhere Roland wouldn't look. And if Roland came for you, if anything happened to push you out of that house, to find you and give it to you. He held it out. I'm sorry it took me so long to get to this point. I'm sorry I wasn't braver sooner. She took the envelope. She opened it. Inside was a single folded document, a photocopy of a contract. The Vantage Ridge LLC Mineral Rights Agreement. 2 signature lines. Roland Voss's signature on the first. On the second line, in the same slightly unsteady hand, she had seen on the framed contract in the mine tunnel Thomas Calloway. But in the margin beside his signature, in very small letters written in red pen, her father had written 6 words. Signed under duress. Signature on original forged.
And below that, a name and a phone number. Agent Brecken Lowe, FBI Field Office, Boise. Wren read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope and put the envelope inside the front cover of her father's notebook and pressed both flat against her chest. Her father had known they might forge his signature. He had known whatever he signed could be used against him and against her. And so he had made a copy, noted the duress, given it to the one man in Oak Haven he believed would hold on to it. And Emmett had held on to it because he was not a bad man. He was a man who had been broken at the exact moment he was most vulnerable and had made a choice he had been paying for ever since. And when the moment came when a 16-year-old girl with her father's eyes walked into his hardware store at closing time and bought a $5 shovel, he had known it was time. I can't go with you all the way, Emmett said. Pruitt knows my truck. If I pull up to the state police station, he'll have a story ready before I get out of the cab. He started the engine. But I can get you close. They drove without speaking. Down the old logging access road onto the county route for a quarter mile, then south onto the state route. The heater ran. Outside the window, the Blackwood Mountains moved past in the dark, the ridge lines and the tree lines and the shapes of the peaks that Wren had been looking at her entire life. After a long time, Emmett said, He talked about you, your father. When he came to see me, he was frightened about the mine, about Roland, about what might happen. But when he talked about you, he wasn't frightened. He was certain. He said he had not raised you to be careful. He had raised you to be right. Wren looked out the window. She did not trust her voice enough to answer. The state route curved south, and the first exit sign for the I-90 commercial corridor came up in the headlights.
Half a mile. Emmett slowed the truck. He pulled onto the shoulder a quarter-mile from the way station entrance. Close enough to see the lights of the building, he put the truck in park. She gathered the notebook, the envelope, her backpack. She pulled her father's jacket tighter.
"You should know," Emmett said, "that whatever happens, whatever they charge me with, whatever comes out about my part in this, I am not going to fight it. I knew what I knew. I should have done something with it sooner. You did something now," she said. He looked at her. "Your daddy told me once that you were the best thing he ever built," he said. He wasn't talking about the land. She looked at him for a moment. Then she opened the door and stepped out into the cold. She walked toward the lights without looking back. The snow was shallow here, packed and crusted, and her boots moved through it without breaking through. The way station was a low building, flat-roofed, flooded with hard orange light. An Idaho State police cruiser sat in the lot. A semi idled at the fuel station. Through the plate glass windows, she could see a counter, a uniformed figure moving behind it. She was 50 feet from the door when her legs finally registered everything they had been doing for the past 4 hours and began to object. Seriously, in a way that suggested the next 50 feet would require a different kind of will than the previous 15 miles. She thought about what Emmett had just told her. He had not raised you to be careful. He had raised you to be right. She walked through the door. The way station was the kind of place that existed purely for function. No warmth in the design. No attempt at comfort. Fluorescent lights. Linoleum floors the color of old mustard. A counter with a scratched glass top. A coffee machine against the far wall that smelled like it had been running since sometime in the previous decade. To Wren Calloway, walking through that door, it was the most beautiful room she had ever seen in her life. The warmth hit her first, then the light, then the smell of burned coffee and floor cleaner, and the institutional neutrality of a building that belonged to the state and not to any person. A building that Roland Voss had not sat in, had not stood in, had no relationships inside. She was 3 steps through the door when her legs decided they were done. Not a dramatic collapse. Her right knee simply stopped accepting instructions, and she went down onto the linoleum with a sound that was part thud and part involuntary exhale. On her hands and knees on the floor of an Idaho State Police way station at 11:47 at night, shaking so hard her teeth were clicking together. She heard boots, fast, and then someone was kneeling beside her. A hand on her shoulder. Not rough. Steady. She looked up. The uniform was Idaho State Police gray. The name tag said Kinsley. The face above it was a woman's face, maybe 50. Strong jaw. Hair pulled back tight. Eyes the color of creek water in August brown and clear and very calm. Sergeant Veda Kinsley looked at the state of her and did not flinch. Can you tell me your name? Wren Calloway. Okay, Wren. Are you hurt?
Cold, not hurt. She pushed herself upright. Her arms were shaking, but they held. I need to talk to you, right now, before you call anyone. Kinsley's hand stayed on her shoulder. Let's get you before you call anyone local. Wren looked at her directly. Please, it matters. Something in Kinsley's face shifted. Not suspicion, assessment. Okay, she said quietly. Come with me.
She helped Wren to the chair behind the counter, put a thermal blanket around her shoulders, set a cup of coffee down, pulled a second chair close, and sat with the quality of attention that meant I am listening. Go. Wren went. She did not start at the beginning. She started with what was in her hands. She put the notebook on the desk and the envelope beside it, and put her own 2 hands flat on the surface, so Kinsley could see they were not shaking anymore. Not from cold, anyway.
My father's name was Thomas Calloway, she said. He died on March 17th of this year. It was recorded as a logging accident by Deputy Dex Pruitt of the Oak Haven County Sheriff's Department. It was not an accident. Kinsley did not reach for the notebook. Not yet. She kept her eyes on Wren. Keep going, she said. So Wren kept going. She was precise. She was specific. She used the names and the dates from the notebook. She described the server farm in the Creston Draw mine with the kind of detail that could only come from having stood in it. Rack configuration, cable routing, junction box placement, the smell of industrial exhaust and ozone, and 1,000 cooling fans running at full capacity in an enclosed space. She described the LLC, Vantage Ridge, Nevada registration, mail forwarding service. She described what she had heard from under the folding table, and then she said the name. The FBI contact my father was working with is Agent Brecken Lowe, Field Office, Boise. She slid the envelope across the desk. That's a photocopy of the mineral rights contract they used to establish the LLC. My father's signature on the second line was forged. He documented that in his own handwriting before they killed him. The note is in the margin. Kinsley picked up the envelope. She opened it. She read. The fluorescent light hummed. Outside, the semi at the fuel station finished its cycle and pulled out. The coffee machine clicked and settled. Wren sat in the thermal blanket and drank the coffee and watched Kinsley read. Kinsley turned to the notebook. She read the final entries, the dates, the voltage numbers, the name of the L. The FBI contact, the final line, keep Wren off the ridge. Kinsley closed the notebook carefully. She looked at Wren for a long moment. How old are you? 16. Something was moving behind Kinsley's eyes. Not doubt. Something more complicated than doubt. Agent Lowe, she said. You're certain of the name. My father wrote it himself. Kinsley pushed back from the desk. She stood. She walked to the window facing the parking lot and stood there with her arms crossed, looking out at the dark. 3 years ago, she said slowly, there was a preliminary inquiry filed with our district regarding unauthorized utility draw in the Blackwood Mountain corridor. Automated anomaly detection on the county grid picked up a consistent overconsumption pattern on the eastern secondary line. The inquiry was passed to the relevant county authority for initial investigation. She paused. It was passed to the county sheriff's department, to Dex Pruitt. Wren understood what that meant.
The inquiry was closed within a week, Kinsley said. Maintenance error, the report said. Old infrastructure, seasonal fluctuation.
She turned from the window. The same inquiry was flagged again 18 months later. Same result. Closed by the same office. By Pruitt. Every time. I know Brecken Low, Kinsley said, her voice quieter now, carrying something careful. I know she opened a preliminary federal file on this corridor. I know because our office was notified as a professional courtesy. She stopped. I know that file was suspended 8 months ago due to the withdrawal of a confidential informant. The room was very still. The withdrawal date, Wren said slowly. Was it March? It was March 19th, 2 days after Thomas Calloway died. He had not simply found the mine and decided to go to the FBI. He had been working with the FBI for months. He had been their source, their informant. He had been feeding information carefully, precisely building the case piece by piece, and Roland had found out through Pruitt, through whatever back-channel relationship Pruitt had maintained with the federal communications coming through the county, and the morning before Thomas was supposed to make his final delivery of evidence. Oh, he had died under a pine tree that had not fallen on him by accident. And the case had gone cold, because the source was gone. Until now. I need to make a phone call, Kinsley said. To Low, and to my watch commander. She was already moving toward the radio room at the back of the station. She stopped in the doorway. Is there anyone you need me to contact, family? Anyone who needs to know you're safe? Wren thought of the dark cabin on the ridge, Roland sitting in her father's chair. No, she said. There's no one. Kinsley nodded. She went through the door. Wren sat in the thermal blanket and looked at her father's notebook on the desk. She thought about the things that had led to this exact chair in this exact room. The $10 in her pocket, the folding shovel, the torn tarp, the 2 days of digging with blistered hands, the blizzard, the warm firewood, the iron door in the hillside. Her father had planted everything she needed inside her before he left. Not on purpose. He had not known what was coming. But he had raised her on a mountain and taught her to read the earth and told her over and over in 100 different ways that the world would try to take things from her, and the only permanent things it could not take were the ones she carried inside. She understood now what he had been giving her all those years. Not survival skills, not land management knowledge, not the ability to navigate 20 miles of wilderness in the dark. Himself. He had been giving her himself. And as long as she remembered who he was and what he had stood for, he was not gone. He was right here, in every decision she made that was hard and right. In every moment she chose to dig deeper instead of giving up. Kinsley came back. The careful assessing quality of a woman who was still deciding things had given way to the steadiness of a woman who had decided.
Lo is already moving, Kinsley said. She told me your father's file is still open. It was never formally closed. She never let it close. She picked up her radio from the desk. She said to tell you he was one of the best informants she has ever worked with. Wren pressed her lips together because she would not cry in a police station. Not tonight. Tonight was not for that. What happens now? She asked. Now we move fast, Kinsley said. Lo is coordinating a federal warrant. I am coordinating state backup. We will have units at the cabin and at the mine entrance before dawn. She was pulling her jacket from the hook behind the door. She held out a second thermal jacket, Wren's size, or close enough. You're coming with me. You're my witness and my source, and you are not leaving my sight until this is done. Wren stood up. She picked up the notebook, the envelope. She put on the jacket over her father's canvas coat. 2 layers. She did not care how she looked. Okay, she said. They went out into the night. The operation moved the way serious things moved when the people involved knew what they were doing. Without drama. Without the kind of noise that announced itself. 2 state police vehicles and a federal tactical unit converged on the Blackwood Ridge from 3 different access roads. While the sky was still dark, the timing coordinated to the minute. Kinsley drove. Wren sat in the passenger seat. She watched the mountain come closer through the windshield. The shapes of it, the ridgelines, the silhouette of the tree line against a sky that was just beginning in the faintest possible way to differentiate itself from pure black. She had spent her entire life on that mountain. Her father had spent his entire adult life on that mountain. Roland Voss had spent the last 8 months trying to own it by removing everyone who stood in his way. The convoy stopped at the base of the driveway. Kinsley's radio crackled. The federal unit was in position at the mine's vehicle entrance in Creston Draw. State units were holding at the County Road Junction, ready to move on Pruitt at the Oak Haven Sheriff's Station simultaneously. The timing mattered. Everything needed to happen at once, because the moment Roland heard a radio call he was not supposed to hear, he would move. And a man like Roland Voss, with 12 years of built relationships and a lawyer on speed dial, and a fundamental belief that he was smarter than everyone in the room, could do a significant amount of damage in the time between knowing and being caught. Kinsley looked at her radio, then at Wren. "You don't have to watch this part," she said. Wren looked at the cabin, the lights inside. Roland was up. Either that or he had never gone to sleep.
Either way, the light in the main room was on, and the light in the study was on, and the whole cabin glowed against the dark mountain behind it, the way it had always glowed. The way it had glowed when Wren was small,
and Thomas would carry her home from the eastern ridge in the evenings, and she would look at it from over her shoulder and feel that particular feeling that children feel before they know the word for it.
Safe. This was her home. "I want to watch," she said. Kinsley keyed the radio. "All units," she said. "Go." The driveway was 200 feet long, gravel lined on both sides with Douglas fir that Thomas had planted as saplings when Wren was 3 years old. The tactical vehicle went up it in the dark, without headlights, moving fast and quiet, and then the lights came on all at once. Vehicle spotlights the particular hard white flood of law enforcement at 4 in the morning, and the cabin went from a warm glow to a shocked, overlit stage set. The front door came in on the second knock, which was not really a knock. Wren sat in the passenger seat and watched it happen through the windshield with her hands folded in her lap. She watched the tactical unit move through the door. She watched the light in the study window go dark, and then come back a flashlight beam sweeping the interior. She heard, even at this distance, the particular sound of Roland's voice when he understood what was happening. The front door opened, and Roland Voss came out onto the porch in handcuffs. He was wearing his boots and his flannel shirt, and his face had done something she had never seen it do in 8 months of sharing a house with him. It had lost the certainty. That settled, I am exactly where I am supposed to be certainty that had been the most consistent thing about him. He looked stripped without it. He looked like what he was. A man who had bet everything on not getting caught and lost. He was being walked down the porch steps when he saw the cruiser. When he saw her in the passenger seat, he stopped walking. The federal agent behind him kept moving, and Roland had to move with him, but he turned his head, and he found her through the windshield glass, and he stared. She looked back. She had thought on the walk through the dark that when this moment came, she would feel something large and consuming. Rage, satisfaction, the relief of a weight being lifted. She had been carrying the knowledge of what he had done for so many hours that she had assumed it would feel enormous when it ended. It did not feel enormous. It felt quiet, like the way a fire feels when it finally burns through the last of the fuel and goes out. Not a dramatic extinction, just a slow, complete, irreversible end. Roland's mouth moved. She could not hear him through the glass. She did not need to. She could read it. "You think you won something?" She looked at him steadily. She did not blink. He was put in the back of the transport vehicle. The door closed, and Roland Voss, who had thrown a 16-year-old girl into a blizzard with $10 and assumed the mountain would handle the rest, disappeared behind a panel of reinforced steel.
Simultaneously, 3 miles away in Oak Haven, Dex Pruitt was being walked out of the sheriff's station in front of the morning shift. In the Creston Draw Ravine, a federal team was cutting through the iron door in the north face of the mine shaft and beginning the systematic shutdown of the Vantage Ridge LLC server operation. All of it happening at once. Because that was how you dealt with a system that had spent 3 years making itself look like the only option. You didn't remove one piece at a time. You removed all of it, simultaneously, before any single piece could warn the others. Thomas had understood that. He had been building toward it for months. His daughter had finished the job. Agent Brecken Lowe arrived at the Callaway cabin at 6:15 in the morning, as the sky was going from gray to the pale washed pink of early winter sunrise. She was younger than Wren had expected. Late 30s, dark hair in a practical cut. A quality of alertness that suggested she had not slept but would not admit to it. She shook Kinsley's hand. She looked at Wren. She did not offer her hand right away. Instead, she looked at Wren the way people look at someone they have been trying to find for a long time. "I'm glad you're alive," she said. "He was good at this," Wren said. "My father. You should know that I know that." Lowe's expression shifted. Something in it softened in the way of a person who had been carrying a specific weight for 8 months and had just been told by the right person that they could set it down. "He was exceptional," Lowe said. She reached into the inside pocket of her jacket and took out a file folder. "Your father made his final contact with our office on March 13th, 4 days before his death." She opened the folder. Inside was a transcript, a single printed page. At the end of that call, he provided his final evidence summary and confirmed he planned to hand-deliver the physical documentation to our office on March 18th. She paused. At the end of the call, after he had provided everything, he remained on the line for an additional 43 seconds after our agent indicated the recording protocol had ended. Wren looked at the transcript. "We almost deleted those 43 seconds, Lowe said. "Standard procedure is to close the recording when the debrief concludes, but the file clerk who processed it decided to include the full recording in the archive." She set the folder on the cruiser hood. "I want you to have this. You don't have to read it today, but I want you to have it." Wren picked up the transcript. She looked at the last entry, the timestamp at the end of the official debrief. Then below a dotted line, a final notation, continued audio, 43 seconds, informal. She read the transcribed words. They were not about Roland, not about the mine, not about the evidence or the case or anything procedural at all. They were about her. "I just want to say off the record or on it, I don't care. My daughter doesn't know any of this is happening. She's not involved, and I intend to keep it that way. But if it doesn't work out the way I'm planning, if something changes, I need someone to know she's up there. Her name is Wren. She's 16 in November. She's the most capable person I have ever met in my life.
And I don't say that because she's mine. I say it because I have watched her figure out hard things her whole life, and I have never once seen her quit. Please find her if something happens to me. She's going to be all right, but she shouldn't be alone. That's all. That's the only thing I wanted to say. Wren stood at the hood of the cruiser in the pale pink of a November dawn on the Blackwood Ridge. She read it again, her father's voice, on paper, spoken into a recording device in a federal agent's office 4 days before he died. Not performing, not afraid, just him. The most ordinary, essential version of him. The one who had put one candle in the pancakes every birthday and held her hand on the eastern ridge and told her that the earth faced east because it was always moving toward the light. She's going to be all right. She folded the transcript along its original crease and placed it inside the front cover of the notebook beside the envelope. She looked at Lo. "Thank you," she said. "He earned it," Lo said. "So did you." The investigation moved with the organized momentum of a federal operation that had been paused for 8 months and was now very much unpaused. The mine was documented and shut down. The server hardware was seized. Vantage Ridge LLC was dissolved by federal order within 48 hours. It took the federal prosecutor 4 months to assemble the full case. Wire fraud, grand larceny, conspiracy, falsification of official records, and for Roland Voss, the charge that sat at the center of everything else, second-degree murder of Thomas Calloway. Roland and Pruitt were sentenced to federal prison. No possibility of parole. Emmett Greer was charged with 1 count of conspiracy. His attorney presented the circumstances, the duress, the sick wife, the silence that had been broken at significant personal cost. The judge suspended sentencing. He was not imprisoned. The cabin and the hundreds of acres of Callaway timberland were returned to Wren's name by federal court order. Every stand of Douglas fir and western red cedar and old-growth tamarack, every creek and ravine and ridge trail, everything Thomas had worked his entire adult life to maintain and protect. The morning after sentencing, Wren drove to Oak Haven and parked in front of Greer's Supply and went in. Emmett was behind the counter. White beard, unhurried movements, the stillness of a man who had been living with something heavy for a long time and had recently put it down. He looked up when she came in. "Inventory error," she said. He blinked, then slowly he understood. "What is it this time?" he asked. "A cup of coffee, if you have one." He had one. They sat on the 2 stools at the old work counter at the back of the store, the way she and Thomas had sat many times over the years when they came to town for supplies. She had forgotten that until now. The exact quality of the light through the dusty back window. Memory was strange that way. It held things you did not know you were keeping. "I'm planting the kitchen garden," she told him. "In the spring, my father had started collecting seeds. They're in the seed box in the workshop." Emmett nodded. Thomas always put them in the 3rd week of April, after the last frost. 3rd week of April, she said. He looked at his coffee cup. I have some tomato seedlings, he said. Margaret started them every February, said store-bought never tasted right. I've been starting them out of habit. A pause. No real use for them now, if you want them. I want them, Wren said. He nodded. They drank their coffee, and the light moved through the dusty window and outside on the main street of Oak Haven. The ordinary life of a small mountain town went about its business unhurried and unchanged the way it always had. In April, Wren planted the garden. The tomato seedlings from Emmett went in along the south fence where they would get the most sun. Thomas's seed collection filled the rest of the beds, the beans, the squash, the herbs he had grown from the same varieties for 15 years, because he said consistency in a garden was a form of respect. She worked through the mornings. The soil was cold at first, still holding the winter, and then gradually less cold. And then one morning in late April, she pressed her palm flat against the garden bed, and the earth was warm. Not electrically warm, not artificially warm. Just the ordinary warmth of soil that had absorbed enough sunlight over enough days to hold it. Her father's kind of warm. She kept her hand there for a moment. One afternoon in early May, she walked down to the eastern ridge, down through the Douglas fir, down the long slope into Creston Draw, along the creek bed that was running clear and cold over the flagstones, now the ice long gone. She stopped at the base of the big western red cedar. The dugout was still there, smaller than she remembered. The pine bough roof had collapsed under the spring snowmelt, but the earthen walls of the trench held their shape. The entrance she had crawled through each night was still open, still framed by the roots of the cedar. She had brought 2 things with her. The first was the entrenching tool, the $5.50 folding shovel, rusted handle and all. She had kept it through the winter, hanging on the pegboard beside her father's tools in the workshop. She set it against the interior wall of the dugout, carefully, upright. The second thing was her father's notebook. She held it for a moment. Thomas Calloway had written every important thing he knew in this notebook. The land, the weather, the creeks and the trees, the evidence that had outlasted him, the final instruction that had sent Emmett out into the dark to find her. She opened it to the last page. Below her father's final entry in the space below, "Keep Wren off the ridge," she wrote her own entry, her own handwriting, not compressed and careful like his. Larger, more deliberate. She wrote the date. She wrote, "I'm here, Dad. The garden is in. The mountain is ours. I know what you were trying to tell me." She closed the notebook. She placed it in the dugout beside the shovel. She did not cover them. She did not mark the spot. She left them where the roots of the cedar could keep them company, and the earth could hold them the way it held everything, steadily, patiently, without judgment. Then she climbed out and stood upright in the spring light. The sun was on the eastern face of the hillside, the one her father had always said was the warmest ground on the ridge, the one that faced east because that was what the earth did always without exception. It moved toward the light. Wren stood with her face turned toward it. She felt the warmth on her skin. She listened to Creston draw, waking up below her, the water moving over the flagstones, the birds returning to the cedar groves, the whole ordinary, irreplaceable life of a mountain in spring. She was 17 years old. She owned every acre she could see from where she stood. Her father had not been able to protect himself from what Roland did to him, but he had done something harder and more permanent. He had spent 16 years building a person who could finish what he started. The shovel and the notebook stayed in the earth where she had placed them. Not as a grave, not as a monument, as a foundation. The $5.50 that had been the beginning of all of it. The words that had been the reason for all of it. Held in the ground that had held her when nothing else would. She pressed her palm flat against the hillside one last time. Warm, steady, honest. The earth doesn't lie. Her father had told her once. She knew that now in a way she had not known it before. Not just as a fact about soil temperature, but as a truth about what endures, about what you can count on when everything else has been taken. She stood up. She turned toward home.